Profoundly Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. Pops.
Hey, Moms.
Hey. So, I wanted to start this episode because in the last one, we talked about how to get over a fear of hell.
Yeah.
And I told the story about going to a religious camp, and that's experience is what triggered my fear of hell.
Right.
And when we were recording, I realized that I had no idea why my mom had sent me to a Christian camp when her family is Jewish. And so one of the things that has made me really enjoy making this podcast is I have learned so much about my parents that I didn't know before. And and they both listen, which is so wonderful and sweet of them. And it's just been quite fascinating realizing the things that we didn't talk about when I was growing up that I'm learning just now as I discuss these things and hear their reactions. Because I mentioned in the last episode that she was actually visiting us when we were recording, and that I should have just asked her, which I didn't do because the question hadn't occurred to me until we were recording. But I did find some time to grab her before she left between all the stuff with the kids and everything else. And the first thing she said was that she had just lost her mind. But then she went on to give a lot of really good reasons why she had thought of a Christian camp. And I'm going to steal a line from Judge John Hodgman that my mom is a person in her own right. So a lot of those stories are hers to tell and not mine. But I will tell two. And after this, I will check with her to make sure she's okay with me telling them. But I thought they were interesting. So the one I sort of knew, and that is that she feels like she was really made the person that she was because of the progressive humanism that was taught at the synagogue that she grew up in. And she loved that, and it greatly contributed to her being somebody who was very active in her school and community. I've talked with the boys a lot about how she was one of the people who protested at her high school and then the high school I went to, who did the protests that made it okay for women to wear pants at school. And by the time I was a kid, synagogues, at least in our area, had just changed a lot, and that progressive humanism wasn't as much the guiding principle. There was a lot of focus on the ritual. There was a big move back to focusing on learning Hebrew, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but just for her, for someone where that had been such a big part of her life, it made her feel more disconnected from that community because it felt like a community that wasn't as, that just wasn't centered on the thing that had been most important to her. So that made a lot of sense. And then the other interesting thing was that my mom was involved in a lot of interesting work at the time. And she was involved in some volunteer work. And a lot of the people who she really respected at that time came from a Christian faith. And so that made her sort of think about that in a more positive light. And she was also doing a ton of church tours. And I have always loved churches. Like even when I was so scared of everything, there are just some beautiful churches. And that has always been a part of us being together, is going and checking out interesting architecture and beautiful architecture, and churches are often a part of that. And so that was also making her feel a little bit more connected and interested in that community. So that was just interesting to hear and made a lot of sense to me. And given how close we were as a family and how much my parents treated me as an equal, I do think it's really interesting why I don't think like I ever asked at the time how the decision was made. I don't know. It makes the whole thing even more interesting, but I'm glad I had a little bit more insight into what my mom was thinking about at the time. And she can say that, she lost her mind, and she reminded me that she used to apologize once a year until I asked her to stop doing it for sending me to that camp. But it was nice to know what she was thinking about and to just get a better insight into her as a parent at the time.
No, I totally get it. And I love how you led off with, it's her story to tell. I don't want to misrepresent. Like, you, through this entire process, have been very open-minded and skeptical about the course that took you to that time, that place, and then what you've learned since. And I think it's been really cool seeing you sort of come into your own through the course of this podcast and reconcile that, because, for the longest time, I just thought it was like this, this weird thing that happened to you and this quirk, but there was a lot more to unpack, and it was your own little personal investigation. I thought it's been really cool to see.
Yeah. And I don't think I realized how much both of my parents were sort of thinking about their faith or lack of it as I was growing up. And I think in very different ways, they were both dealing with a lot of the same questions I was. And I don't know, I suppose I could look back and sort of be upset that we weren't talking about them at the time. But I think I feel more like, in a way, it makes me feel like we were connected without knowing it. Like, to know we were all sort of questioning and thinking about things at the same time. I guess it would have been interesting if we had been more open and talking about it. But I find in retrospect something sort of charming and communal about it.
Yeah, I see that.
Knowing that we were all in a place of, I don't know about doubt, but just sort of in a place of exploration without even knowing it. So yeah, so that little mystery is solved, and I shared part of it with you guys, and there's a lot more that I now know, and I'm really glad I do.
Yeah. And it also, I think, is a good reminder that we both shouldn't take those sorts of negative experiences as wholly negative, that we should attempt to learn from them, right? Like, part of being skeptical is applying that skepticism to the good and the bad, and not just saying, like, I'm going to withhold belief until I have justification. It cuts both ways. Like, you can also say, this bad thing happens that I definitely know happened, but I choose how I can qualify it. I can choose what I take from it. Right. And that's empowering. And I think that you've given yourself that choice, and that it used to be a trigger for you, and now it isn't anymore. I think we can watch all the horror movies and it doesn't send you into a state of shock.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I feel bad about not mentioning in the last episode is just how long it took me. I mean, I feel like when I entered college, I sort of got over the big wave of that fear. But for years later, I thought of them as hell moments to myself. Like little things could come up that would just give me that twinge again, if that makes sense.
Totally does.
And I could be thrown back into it for like an hour or a day.
You experienced trauma. It might seem trivial to some people. And for a Christian who believes such things in that way could just be like, you know, par for the course. Like of course you have to have that fear. But for you, where you don't have this framework that justifies the fear, it's just this raw nerve. Like it totally makes sense that you would circle back to that when you have some sort of trigger. Like don't second guess yourself and don't trivialize it. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, but that's why I wanted to mention it, because I didn't want people to feel like, and maybe for you it was more just like getting over it, but I just wanted people to know that like it takes a long time. And I can now say that I think it's been years since I've really had that. But it probably took another 10 years to get to that point where like,
yeah,
towards the end, it was probably like maybe like once a year or something, but it just took a really long time for it to be truly not a thing at all.
Well, good on you.
Yeah. It's nice not to have that happen anymore.
Yeah. I agree.
Let's see. Do you want to kick off our first topic because it was your idea?
I can't remember which one was my idea and which one was your idea.
Okay, so for our
Marriage.
It's what brings us together today.
Literally, truly is.
It truly is.
It truly is.
So for our first topic, we wanted to talk about how we deal with people that we might have otherwise looked up to, but who are or who have become problematic for some reason.
I was talking specifically about celebrity culture.
Yeah.
Idols.
Yes.
Because somebody you look up to could be like, as a kid, like your little league coach or your high school art teacher or whatever. Like this is something where it is a person with whom you have no direct contact, who would not be able to pick you out from a crowd, somebody with whom you have a parasocial relationship, right?
Yes.
Where all of the investment is you toward that person. They don't care about you. That's not fair. In a great number of cases, you could say that if the person met you, they would care very much. Like, I don't like his music necessarily. Like, I think he's a fine singer and a songwriter and band leader, but like Post Malone, I'm not a Post Malone fan, but the dude is really nice. And I've seen lots of instances of him being really generous and kind. Also, he's really tall. Like he's unnaturally, unexpectedly tall, but like nicest guy. And so I can see him as being a role model for that. And so my thought was all these people who voted for Donald Trump, what are they thinking now? Some of them will, to the bitter end, sing his praises, right? Mm-hmm. But for others who might have had a specific reason they voted for him, seeing him now having fallen so far, would they look up to him in any capacity? And that sent me down this whole rabbit hole of thinking about all these other celebrities who have fallen out of favor with me, or I think other people should have fallen out of favor with their fans to a certain degree, though I know it's not as clear as that. But because I settled on it being, wow, it's just a big gray area, like all morality, I thought it would be an interesting topic.
Yeah. And as soon as we started talking about it, I realized how inconsistent I am in those judgments.
Yes.
I don't think I have like a very clear, I just like, I can think of many celebrities that I've completely given a pass to for absolutely no good reason. And others that I am this is not an area where I have, very definable rules. It is very much a gut feeling.
Well, talking about like morality, about what you think is good or bad or whatever, in a judgment, like that sometimes can be hard to pin down. But with, celebrities, we have public examples, well-documented examples of behaviors from people that we all we can all discuss and relate to. And our reactions, our judgments then to them can sometimes be a better indicator about what we consider moral or immoral, or those topics about which we tend to be amoral, than just coming out and asking us directly, what's your position on this? Like, it's a rubber meets the road thing. It's a specific example of a situation that itself has nuance. And so it allows us to sort of not play around with our morality. That sounds bad, but more to flex our morality and in application to judging whether or not we're going to keep this celebrity, this celebrity politician, whoever the public figure is, in that like circle of celebrity trust that we all have, or are we going to push them out of the circle because what they did is too much of a violation? Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking about Louis C.K. and Kevin Spacey and Bill Cosby, Hassan Minaj. I was thinking about Tom Cruise. There are a lot of different, like a big variety. I know, but the thing is,
said 4 people, and I believe 3 of them were accused of hurting people,
right?
And one of them was accused of just lying, and so those are very different.
I know, but that's the point.
Things.
Is that the whole topic is a giant gray area. And so you could say there's a list of people that may have been pushed out of my circle of celebrity trust. But once they're out for a specific reason. They could come back in because what they did was, in my personal estimation, not egregious enough to be a perma ban. Mm-hmm. They were not hit with the ban hammer. They were just given a suspension. Right? Like Hassan Minaj, for some people, they might not care at all. Like for me personally, like I said, I don't care at all. Mm-hmm. Because like for those of you who don't know, Hassan Minaj is a comic. He recently admitted to embellishing the personal anecdotes he was using in his routines. And that in some people's view, this was tantamount to lying. He was essentially, it was like fraud in a comic sense. And I personally, I like good stories told well. I care less if they're true. If I'm watching Lord of the Rings, I don't turn it off at the setup and be like, no, that's rubbish. There aren't hobbits. Right? Like you want to be entertained. Is it funny? Does it speak to human experience? Can you relate to it? Does it really matter how totally like word for word accurate is it to his really true lived life? I don't know. Do other comics do it? Probably. Was he vocal about it? Yeah. Does that make me maybe, given that it's likely that other comics have done it before and not been found out, does that make me like Hassan more because he was honest about it? Yeah. So he didn't leave my circle of trust. He admitted to it.
Yeah. Well, so, okay.
Other people, like he did not do what some other comics have done, which is circle the internal wagons and just call other people silly or whatever or worse for not believing him or, like getting narcissistic. Like he fessed up to it. That deserves credit in my eyes. And also I didn't think that the offense was egregious, right? And the other people that I listed had more what I would consider to be egregious offenses, morally speaking.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think to me, when I started thinking about it, there are many different categories that I think I use when this stuff comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So the first is how...
This sounds like degrees of murder.
Yeah.
You have manslaughter, aggravated assault, manslaughter, and then 3 degrees of murder. So are we going to start with aggravated assault, or are we just going straight to 3rd degree murder?
Well, I think there are multiple things. Like the first is just how important that person is to me. So I think, like, I think I just assume that most celebrities are kind of a pain in the ass a lot of the time. Like, once you get that, I'm somebody who believes that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
So once you get a certain level of power, my main assumption with most famous people is that to at least one degree or another, they are a pain in the ass.
Yes.
So I am less likely to be shocked, I think.
Well, to quote my father, people are no damn good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am rarely shocked when bad behavior is discovered. I think I also would say that I probably have less celebrities that are really important to me than most people. There are a few celebrities that I follow pretty closely, but probably not as much as a lot of people have. So I also have less people where I feel like I have a horse in the race, if that kind of makes sense. So I think that side kind of cuts 2 ways for me. One, I think sometimes that means it's easier for me to just cut somebody off. Like, if I don't care about their work that much, I'm like, oh, turns out they were like being a total jackass to people who worked for them. Well, I never watched their shit anyway. So like, it doesn't, like, maybe now I will more intentionally never interact with their work, but I barely interacted with it to begin with. So
I was not upset when Kirk Cameron came out as a bat poo-poo crazy creationist.
Oh, that's an interesting one, actually.
And I wasn't upset when Cameron, his sister, Candace, his sister, ended up being a bit loony too.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have any stake in the success of their product. I didn't consume it.
Yeah. I did really like his show. He was on... Which of the 80s shows was he on?
Growing Pains.
Growing Pains. That was probably my favorite of the 80s shows. And I actually, as a kid, really liked a movie he did, which was, now I see, like, leading into his level of Christian craziness. It was about a debate team and abortion. And it was, it was far more, like, pro-life than pro-choice in the end, though it did kind of have some shades of complexity. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, I really, I bought into that maybe more than I should have. But I think the other way that cuts for me is when I'm not a huge fan. So what I consume is kind of fairly rare. Like, you brought up Michael Jackson, right?
In our personal conversation, I think I omitted him from the list here.
Oh, okay. So somebody like Michael Jackson, I fully believe the accusers that he probably did some very bad things with children. And that is awful. But it's not like I listen to his music all the time. I'm not going to his musical on Broadway. But like when so if I hear it, it's like as part of a mix a couple times a year, or like if it comes on the radio. And in that sense, because I care less, I'm sort of like, well, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to turn this song off. Do you know what I mean? Like, it sort of lowers the stakes for me in that way, because I don't feel like my participation in what they've created is so great that it really impacts things at all. I don't feel like I'm particularly sending a lot of money to his estate. I don't feel like whatever I'm doing is like an outward show of support. So it doesn't feel like it's worth like making a hard line to cut it out completely. And maybe I should, but just for me in my head, when it's somebody who I sort of don't care about and it's offhand, I don't know if I make as big of a point about it, I guess.
Well, first, I do want to apologize to our legal eagles out there. I did misspeak a couple of minutes ago when I said third-degree murder was the most severe. Obviously, it is first-degree murder. But I will counter your point, Moms, with, will you watch a rerun of The Cosby Show?
No. But that's the other category. So to me, the other thing for me that sets Michael Jackson apart a little bit, or people like that, is I don't feel like what they've created has any direct link to what the bad things that they did. And to me, Cosby's image and how he presented himself has a direct link to the bad things he did.
Do you feel that in retrospect, you feel more betrayed given that he had this family-friendly image that he banked on?
Yeah.
Whereas Michael Jackson didn't have a family-friendly?
I mean,
you sure about that? With The Wiz and Macaulay Culkin and bringing kids up on stage? Michael Jackson was a very family-friendly.
Well, he was family.
He got famous because he sang with his brothers and sisters. And and like, I don't know, like it
but
seems
it's
like
not his fault.
You might have a double standard.
He was a child star. But
that's true.
But to me, none of his songs are like about any part of the controversy. Whereas I feel like what Cosby produced,
I could make so many bad taste jokes about Michael Jackson right now, just referencing song titles. Do you want one? Or is it, would that be too bad?
No,
I can't help
do it.
If I wanted to, couldn't help it, even if I could. I can't help it if I wanted to.
All right.
Wouldn't
maybe,
help
I don't know,
now.
maybe somebody, maybe somebody could see. But to me, he was just singing pop songs and terrible things were happening.
And also people are writing him songs to sing. It is different when you're a performer like that than it is with Bill Cosby, who it wasn't like he was just reading what other people wrote. Like,
no, he wanted to present himself as a model of, I mean, he had all those jokes about how young black men shouldn't act.
Yeah.
And
with a saggy bag of pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
they should eat more pudding pops.
Oh my God. And, and I feel like his show was doing the same thing. It was kind of this image of like what a black family could look like. And the fact that he was doing these terrible things.
Oh, it's so sad because it was like that big crossover hit that you could use as being like, oh, here's this cultural touch point that was so beloved. And it showed a successful, professional, affluent black family where it wasn't just like, oh, they won the lottery, right? Like, I mean, no offense to the Jeffersons. I like the Jeffersons, but at the same time, it's not the same sort of show. And to have him just be like, he's a doctor and she's a lawyer. And
he was a gynecologist, wasn't he?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And a gynecologist who basically worked in his home office. He brought his work home with him.
Anyways, but
but still, I get it. But I don't want to beat up on Bill Cosby for too long because we have so many other examples that we could touch on that offer a different part of the conversation.
But it's interesting to look at Hassan Minhaj in that light. Because, well, one, I have to plug. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and everybody's always asking for podcast recommendations.
Yeah.
One podcast I never hear mentioned, which is one of my favorite podcasts, is called Good One.
Yay!
And they do a lot of different things, but sort of like the core of it, the guy who hosts the show is like fascinated by comedy. I think he's coming out this year with a book all about comedy. And he talks with comedians about one joke and how they developed one joke. And it has taught me so much about the art of comedy and how comedians think and just how hard that job is. So if you have any interest in stand-up comedy, Good One is such a great podcast. And I've discovered so many comics I never would have known about had it not been for that show. Given the topic of this one, Daniel Sloss, who's an atheist comedian, who's amazing.
Yes.
Never would have heard of him.
No.
Were it not for that podcast. So,
love Daniel Sloss.
But I think Hasan Minhaj is interesting because when I listen to Good One, it is very established the comedians will just change stories for their acts. I mean, it's a trope in stand-up comedy. It's like a bad trope. Like, oh, yesterday I was. And it's like, of course that didn't happen yesterday. You've been telling that joke all year, but you're just like setting it up in a way that feels current and present. You know what I mean? And almost every comedian I've listened to has talked about how they changed the original story.
Thank you.
Except maybe Tig Notara, who...
She doesn't need to.
Her life is so wild. I don't understand.
Tig will be sitting at a bus stop and like the Dalai Lama will sit down next to her.
Yeah.
And she'll turn to the Dalai Lama and say, "What's up?" Because, I mean, after all, what do you say to the Dalai Lama?
Yeah. Actually, like, her episode of Good One is amazing to listen to because it becomes very clear that the real story is actually far more wild than the one she tells on stage. So,
that's the Taylor Dane.
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
the
that
Taylor
is
Dane story.
One of the funniest. And she doesn't have to dress it up, which is the funniest part of it.
Yeah, she
just tells the story. And
she actually has
gives
to
pauses.
Take parts away because there's too much.
Yeah, she just gives pauses in the right places. Anyway, we're not going to geek on Tig. Anyway,
it's very established, and I don't think anybody would be mad about it. The thing about Hasan Minhaj is that he is also making some political points in his act, and I think that is where it changes to me. I don't think if it was like just a joke for laughs that anybody would have given two shits and it wouldn't be a news story. The story he was telling was about people being so mad with him that they sent something to his home that might have been anthrax and his daughter coming in contact with it and having to go to the hospital. So yes, it is a story in his act, but he is telling that story for a point beyond humor.
That's a good point.
And so when you make a point based on something that has happened in your life, I think the expectation is different. You're doing something slightly different. And if he had just changed something to make it a little bit funnier, to like have a moment of humor in that story, like maybe the doctor says something that's funny and he like adds that in and, oh, the doctor didn't say that. I also don't think that would have been a news story. I think people would have perfectly understood that. But I think, and I didn't follow it that closely, but I think what was discovered is that parts of that story actually did not happen. And that, I'm not saying we should cancel him, but not that I even believe cancellation happens. I think Louis C.K. was up for a Grammy, so like
that I don't understand that cancellation at all.
Is not a thing, but I do understand why it was a news story, and I don't think it's exactly the same as somebody just like making a joke about something their dad said and changing what he said. Like clearly that's not. There was a comedian who does a ton of jokes about her dad, and her friend came up with something very funny. There was just like something her dad would say, and he gave it to her and she used it in the act. And it was so good that her dad now like says it like it's something he used to say. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
But nobody's mad at that because there's no bigger point being made. But I think he was trying to make a bigger point, and then I think you have more of a duty to your audience.
And if all of that is necessarily true, then I totally stand corrected. But it also means that he would not, for me, be in the doghouse in the same way that I think Louis C.K. and Kevin Spacey will be in the doghouse with me forever. Not like they care. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the fact that they don't care, it itself is problematic because I was their fan before.
Yeah.
And they lost me as a fan, and not caring about making any sort of, amends, just walking away for a while, twiddling their thumbs, waiting it out, and then coming back when the mood suits them. Like, it's gross. You have to compensate for the wrong that you do. And that'll bring me to Tom Cruise. Because I think this is real interesting because I think Scientology is a cult and I think it's weird and gross, and what he specifically, asked his ex Katie Holmes to do in the birth of their daughter was hella weird, but that's like a Scientology thing. It's not just a Tom Cruise thing. Is he found Scientology at a very specific time in his life. Has he been victimized by Scientology? I think people, like, when you're in a cult and your brain has been warped to that degree, I think that there is a degree of victimhood. And I can find myself siding, regardless of the behaviors that that those people are performing in the name of the cult or because of the cult's teachings. I find myself feeling that empathy for them because they don't necessarily, like, given other circumstances, they might not have fallen into it. They might not be doing these things now, right? Like, how much of it is conditioning? I don't know. But through COVID, we learned how science-minded and strident Tom Cruise was in protecting his sets from outbreaks, in making sure that everybody on set was practicing, like, all of the things, all of the distancing, all the masking, all of the vaccinations, all of the health measures that, like, over and above. He was really adamant about it to the point where he was berating people. And is that necessarily good? I don't know. Maybe. It was a pandemic. If you don't take it seriously, bad stuff can happen, as we all found out. So that basically helped bring him back and made me realize, you know what? Like, sure, he did this thing with his ex-wife. Like, is he in a cult? Sure. Do cults make you do messed up things? Sure. Is he doing this other thing in this industry I love to help make a movie that I definitely will appreciate, in a very socially responsible way, providing livelihoods for the cast and crew at a time when most other big productions had been shut down, shelved, right? His was still going, like, by his sheer force of will, by being that strident about COVID concerns. And it's like, okay, so how does that sway my opinion about him? Well, it kind of brought it back. I enjoyed seeing Maverick. I was able to separate the things that he did, Tom Cruise the man, from Tom Cruise the entertainer, in a way that I had not been able to do for a while before. And we were watching the Mission Impossible movies with the kids before that. Like, it was a lot easier for me personally. Like, anybody cares, but still, like, these are subjective judgments, and my skepticism about him as a person was overcome by that expression on set. And so it is. So like I said, when I brought this topic to you as a potential, I was like, this could get real weird and interesting. So let's talk about it. So do you have anything other than like Tom Cruise where you could point to and say that person was in the weeds with me and now I brought them back into the, the flower patch?
Well, what that makes me think of is I feel like I was saying, I think celebrities are often just like a pain in the ass. Everybody's gotten used to hearing about celebrities being awful to people they work with.
Yeah.
Because of the awful world we live in, everybody has gotten used to celebrities being accused of rape or child abuse or those kind of things. But then I feel like for us as atheists, we have a whole different category, which is when you like somebody and then you're like, oh, but they're super religious. And that is not in the same category. I'm not saying that being religious is like doing those other terrible things.
No, for the record, Kirk Cameron being a creationist bothers me so much less than what his creationism and his like weird evangelical stuff also entails, what it propels his rhetoric toward, like a lot of hurtful othering and support of things that would directly harm people that I care about. And it's just like, I mean, guy, he can do so much better. And he just chooses not to.
But I feel like
he has a platform. That's the thing, is that
and he has a platform. Trying.
He really is trying to be shitty.
It's his point.
Yeah.
To talk about these things. Yeah. But I feel like it just, like I really liked Mel Gibson. And that's one where like, I'm still gonna
And you're a Jew.
I'm a Jew. I'm still going to watch his movies. I'm sorry. I still really like some of them.
I mean, we just watched The Patriot.
Yeah.
Aim small, miss small.
I think his Hamlet is one of the better ones. I know that's an unpopular opinion.
I think that is an unpopular opinion.
But I really like it.
Not nearly as unpopular as Mel Gibson gets a pass, I guess, but no,
again, I think to me, he seems like somebody with like pretty deep psychological issues as well. And also based on his dad's really weird religious beliefs, I feel like it has kind of that like growing up in a cult aspect to it too. So maybe that's part of the reason I've given that a pass. I don't know.
I mean, Mel Gibson is in like, he is like super Catholic. Yeah. Like he's not just like, okay, cool, yeah, trying the Marian thing and transubstantiation, yada yada. No, he is like, gold shoes, silk robes.
He
Catholic.
Believes some really awful things.
Yeah, he has some pretty extreme positions.
So can't really justify that, but that's where I've come down on that one. What's his name? Star-Lord.
Chris Pratt.
That's one where like
he hasn't actually come out and said anything. He actually is rather like pleasantly tight-lipped about his political and his religious beliefs. Yes, he does go to Hillsong. There are many Hillsongs, but this one is mine. Sorry, Full Metal Jacket. But he doesn't necessarily say that he fully sides with their view on trans folk, right? Yeah. But he does give his financial support to the church, invariably.
Yeah. And so that's one where we still go see the movies, but I think I'm just not putting any eggs in that basket. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always going to have a level of one step back from him. Like, my fandom is like, all right, I know there's probably something I'm not going to like there, so I'm just not going to put a lot of energy into that one. And I don't know. So I feel like, Yeah, I'm just totally inconsistent.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
I think it's such a hard thing to do because there's a lot of emotionality. Like you have an investment in watching or reading or listening to this artist's product. And you have your own history, your own very personal set of experiences attached to those things. Reading that book that got you through a tough time in your life. That song that you listened to when you were heartbroken. That movie that you and your future spouse, watched on your first date. Those are emotional attachments. They're so deeply personal that it becomes very difficult to separate yourself from them. And I don't think it's fair to expect yourself to. I just think it's such a fascinating way of looking at your own morality that I'm going to be on the lookout for moments where I find myself in a moment of like cognitive dissonance. Like I kind of was before, but now that we've talked about it's going to be my thing for the next couple of months. So hopefully I'll find some interesting ones. And if I find some really interesting ones, maybe we can circle back.
Yeah. All right. We've gone super long. We should probably wrap it up there.
Yes.
So we need to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that wraps up this lively episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
I don't know if that was a mess, but I'll find out when I'm editing.
I don't think it's going to be a mess. I just think that there's going to be a lot that you have to edit out, but
yeah.
Good luck.
We'll see. I love you.
I love you too.